Hey everyone, Paul here from FamilyWheels.ca with another car review for your growing family. And this week, a bit of a swan song for a vehicle that's become a real mainstay of the Audi family. It's the Q5 in its current generation. Since it came on the market, the Q5 has become Audi's top-selling vehicle in Canada. We saw it first arrive here in 2009. It's had some tweaks along the way, and it's being completely redesigned for 2018. It's going to be bigger, it's going to be lighter, there's going to be a lot more in terms of features on the inside, and it's going to be made in Mexico. So for 2017, this is your last chance to get into a German-made Q5, which has a lot of people wondering whether they should wait for this next generation or go with the tried and true in this previous generation. Now, I've had a chance over the last few years to try out a number of the different engines that are available in the Q5. First up, there's that basic 2-liter turbocharged engine, which is still very fun, but also very efficient. Last year on the program, we were driving around in the 3-liter turbocharged engine, but what better way to sort of see the current Q5 off than take a spin in the SQ5. This is a much more performance-oriented vehicle. The S line of cars from Audi, after all, is meant to compete with BMW's M division. The Q5 was the first SUV a number of years back in the Audi line to get that S treatment. Think bigger brakes, think stiffer suspension, sportier seats, and obviously a much more beefed up power plant as well. We have a 3-liter supercharged engine on board here, so while it might look at first blush when you're just looking at it driving down the road much like a regular Q5, it certainly doesn't feel like it once you get out on the road. The big question this week is it worthwhile to wait for that 18 to show up, or is it better to stick with the tried and true? We're going to put this thing through its paces, fly around a few corners, and see how this SQ5 stacks up to the competition. That's this week on Family Wheels. You know, as soon as I step into a Q5, I kind of feel like I'm getting into a car with an old friend. The build quality in these cars is fantastic. And, you know, you've got that legendary Quattro all-wheel drive system regardless of the trim that you get with the Q5. But the second that I press this ignition button right here, I start to notice that things are a little bit different. So while I typically don't geek out with you on numbers like 0 to 100 times and number of horsepower, and kind of intentionally do avoid those sorts of numbers, this is a more performance-oriented car. So I'm going to indulge myself this week, and here are some of the numbers you need to know. First up, that basic Q5 with the 2-liter turbocharged engine on board is giving you 220 horsepower. This SQ5 has 354 of them. This is the same supercharged engine you're finding on the A6, the Q7, the S4, so some pretty high-level cars in the Audi line. And it does have incredible torque. By that I mean that basically any time I put my foot down on the gas, whether that's right from a standstill or when I'm passing somebody on the highway and I'm already doing 100 kilometers an hour, the power is there, and there's gobs of it as well. And it's this gutsy, throaty engine that rockets us from 0 to 100 in 5.4 seconds. Now, granted, the BMW X5M, which is a much larger vehicle, can get up to that same speed in 3.8 seconds, but man, you look at the price tag difference, this thing starts at 58 grand, whereas that X5M starts at $106,000. So the SQ5 shares exactly the same 8-speed automatic transmission as you can find on any of the Q5 line, but it has been sport tuned ever so slightly, and the result is quicker, crisper shifts. And I actually thought this car might have a double clutch system on board when I first jumped in, but it doesn't. It's just been really nicely tuned. It also, because of that tuning, you get this amazing little exhaust note in between shifts when you really floor it. Take a listen. Oh, I love that sound. It's really addictive. I've been doing that a fair bit here this week. And then when you want to play around in the corners, we also have paddle shifters standard on all SQ5s as well. here we are in some corners, and you can see that I am riding really flat here. That's one thing that really surprised me about this car as well. I knew that it would corner well because the regular Q5 is no slouch in that department either, but this thing is just glued. It's like flat as a pancake when I get into these corners here. Here I am shifting down with those paddle shifters, and I really can't believe that I'm in an SUV right now with some pretty decent ground clearance and you know, very comfortable 5-passenger comfort as well. The downside to this cornering ability is the fact that the ride is pretty stiff when you get on any kind of bumpy roads at all. So if you have a potholed back alley in your daily commute, you're gonna feel every single one of those bumps every day. These seats, these sport seats, are also very firm. So you kind of have to weigh out in your mind what's important to you. A sportier ride with, you know, firmer suspension, sportier seats, bigger brakes, or something that feels just a little bit more composed and maybe not quite as harsh for day-to-day driving. As you might be able to tell from my great big blank-eating grin, yeah, I'm probably leaning toward the SQ5 here this week. Now, speaking of these bigger, more performance-oriented brakes, they're very effective, but the downside is that they require a certain specific rim because the rotor is so much bigger. So if you wanted to replace a rim or say get an extra set of winter tires, it's going to be a much more expensive prospect in this than versus the regular Q5. Another thing that I'm noticing here is that it's fairly loud in here, and I think that has a lot to do with the tires that are on board this tester. With our decibel reader on the same stretch of highway that we always test, at 100 kilometers an hour, I averaged 64 decibels with this car, which is nothing to sneeze at, but certainly a lot louder than that Audi Q7 that we tested a few months ago, and I also think louder than the regular Q5 as well. So all this talk of performance and 0 to 100 times and horsepower might have you a little bit worried about fuel efficiency with the SQ5, but actually it's not as bad as I thought it might be. That regular Q5 that we tested last year with the 3-liter turbo on board, we saw about 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers. This week in the SQ5, we're seeing about 11 liters per 100 kilometers. And for me, that big boost in exhilaration factor here in this car is well worth that little difference in fuel efficiency. Another thing that I like about the SQ5 is the fact that you don't lose some of the everyday capabilities of this car by throwing a sport package on it like you do in a lot of vehicles. So for example, bumper to bumper traffic with this thing, it doesn't feel like a growling beast just kind of lurching forward waiting to go. It feels very composed, much like the regular Q5. Also, the regular Q5 has a pretty remarkable towing capacity of 4,400 pounds. That's really excellent for a car of this size. I mean, the Subaru Forester, for example, can tow 1,500 pounds. The SQ5 continues to have exactly that same towing capacity, so you don't lose out on that capability here when you go to the sport package. And then finally, all Q5s, including the SQ5, have a top safety pick plus rating from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. So you know that even though it is a bit of a sportier, bit more get up and go kind of vehicle, that it's still a very safe vehicle for cruising around in with your family. All that said, the Q5 and the SQ5 by extension is starting to feel like it's just running out the clock at this point while we wait for that 2018 Q5 to come out. The navigation system, which costs $2,800 on top of the SQ5's base $58,000 price tag, is really clunky. The menus are difficult to wade through, and when you do try and use the voice recognition software, I've just gotten completely lost. In fact, I've gotten a 0% success rate with the voice recognition this week, even though I tried really hard. I wanted to at least get one address right, and I just couldn't, so I wound up using my phone for navigation this week instead. Then when we look at the actual screen itself on the infotainment system, it's really small. It's also not a touch screen like we're seeing on a lot of other competitors at this point. Instead, we've got this little dial down here in the center console by the shifter. And then when we look at the instrument cluster, and compare it to that Q7 that I tested a couple of months ago with that virtual cockpit, which just blew my mind. That is like an industry-leading gold standard, and this is just far more basic, and the technology feels like it's pretty old at this point. Then when we step outside, yeah, the Q5 is just starting to look like it needs a bit of a facelift. It's time for a refresh, and that's where that 2018 comes in. And the folks at Glenmore Audi who lent us this vehicle this week here in Calgary say that it won't disappoint on that front. It's going to look better, it's going to be a little bit bigger, it's going to have more fuel efficiency, it's going to be lighter, lighter, it's going to be sportier, and interior refinement is going to be better than ever. So the interior dimensions on the SQ5 are going to be exactly the same as they are on the regular Q5. And when we tested that car a couple of years back now, I was really impressed with what I saw there. So no surprise, same deal here. In the back seat, you can see that my headroom as a 6'2" adult is just about maxed out, but I'm still doing fine. So anyone shorter than that is going to be all right. And then here for legroom, also really good for an SUV of this size. And I like to see these plastic inserts here on the backs of the front seats, so that if you've got kids kicking these seats all the time, it's not going to scuff up the leather. Some of the other things that you're going to see on the SQ5, which I think kind of really set it off, are these suede door liners here, which look really good, and that's in the front and second row. And then here, this is an option, this carbon fiber inlay, but again, it kind of makes it look even that much sportier. In the second row, you can see we've got heated second row seating, and we also have this great big panorama sunroof, which does help kind of keep this space feel a little bit airier. That is standard on all SQ5s, regardless of the trim that you choose. Now here's something I am super excited about, which is that we don't have pinhole perforated seats here on this SQ5. Since it is a sportier vehicle, I thought it would be a given. It's all the rage these days, but these are going to be so much easier to wipe down and keep clean for a family as a result. There is one kind of seating option that you have in the SQ5, which is a diamond stitch pattern. It's going to create sort of little opportunities for things to collect in between each of those little sort of quilted pockets. And one thing to keep in mind is that for 2018, I wouldn't be surprised if the redesign did have pinhole seats, just because they are so popular, and it's something that we're seeing in a lot of interiors right now. All right, let's take a look at the trunk now. All SQ5s come standard with an auto lift tailgate, which comes up pretty quickly too. Some of the other vehicles in this category have a very slow lift tailgate, which can be a real pain. This has 824 liters of trunk capacity, which is quite decent for an SUV of this size. And it means you can see that our standard amount of gear, a diaper bag, a couple of bags of groceries, a backpack, a soccer ball, and a fold-up stroller has all fit totally fine. You'd still have room for the family dog, although it would be a little bit of a pinch. Now the back seats can fold down really easily right here. You do have to kind of go like that so that they will sit flush, but you can see here it's not a completely flat load floor, pretty darn close though. Here's something else. We've got a 40-20-40 split. If you wanted to be able to put a pair of skis through that kind of window there, you could do that as well. Now this doesn't quite have the same trunk capacity as that Subaru Forester that we tested a couple of weeks ago, which had 974 liters. That's quite a bit more than this, and that's because if you look at the way this vehicle is, it's got a very sporty back window kind of roof line off the back of it. If it was boxier and more square off the back, you'd get a little bit more in terms of what you could fit into this trunk. That said, my folks have had a Q5 for years, and they have two huge dogs, and it's a total non-issue for both of those dogs to fit. It's a squeeze, but it works in the trunk area. And then finally, let's take a look at our rear-facing car seat test. If this is anything like the regular Q5 that we tested a couple of years ago, it's going to be tight. And sure enough, we've got about 7.5 inches of legroom up front here. It means that for a tall guy like me, yeah, headroom's pretty limited. Legroom's going to be a bit of, that's actually the bigger challenge, is legroom. It could work for a short haul drive, but long haul drives with a tall person, it's going to be a squeeze. That's often the issue with SUVs of this size, is that rear facing car seats really do make it a little bit challenging for front passenger comfort. That said though, I mean, when you look at this vehicle and the fact that it's able to carry so much in the trunk that you can have kids sitting comfortably in the back seat, with the exception of course of rear facing car seats, and you are driving something this sporty, it's a pretty awesome combination. But the big question here becomes, what do you do? What do you do when you've got a bestseller from a company that's tried and tested, fun to drive, made in Germany, being replaced by a car that's going to be better than ever according to the company, but made in Mexico at a facility that's never produced this vehicle before? Which way do you go? The plus side here is that according to Glenmore Audi, the new Q5 should be coming into showrooms in the spring of 2017. So that means you might have an opportunity to drive both the old version of the Q5 and the new version and make your mind up for yourself. In the meantime, I'd love to have you leave a comment below and wade into this debate yourself. Please subscribe while you're at it, and then head over to familywheels.ca to see our list of pros and cons for the Q5 in its current generation. Maybe some of those cons are going to be taken care of in this new 2018. Next week on the program, we're looking at the Ford Fusion Hybrid, a remarkably efficient yet rather large size sedan that shares the same platform as that Lincoln MKZ that we tested a couple of weeks ago. So we'll see how that one does. I'm going to get a few more of these amazing little exhaust notes out of the SQ5. Have a great week. We'll see you in 7 days.